Economic figures are usually quite tricky. You see one thing and then you try to reflect on it and wonder, is this my reality or just figures? That has been a classic debate. And today we get into it yet again, particularly because now is a crucial time for our nation, Nigeria. And, all of the ideas are welcome just to ensure that we move forward considerably. We're joined on the program this morning, right here in our Lagos studio, by Mr. Roman Osegale, who's a business and economic intelligence analyst and a head consultant and CEO, IntelServe Incorporated. And joining us via Zoom is Gospel Bailey, a research economist. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the morning brief.
Thank you.
I'd just like to get your opening comments. GDP figures have been released. And as always, people look at the figures, they look at their pockets, they look around them, and they wonder, okay, how do we link this? Particularly because the WTO-DG made a statement, I think 24 hours before the figures were released, talking about Nigeria's GDP steadily declining since 2014. And we got GDP figures for Q2 saying, well, we've done quite well, at least. There's a positive to it all. So I'd like us to start with the classic debate. When you look at the figures and look at the reality of people, particularly now, do they link up for you? Opening comments, then we'll dive deeper. I'll start with you.
Thank you for having me. GDP growth in Nigeria has never really, if you look at history, that never really resulted in improvements of lives for the people. If you look at MBS figures from the 80s, you'll be surprised. Just like the GDP is going up, you also see poverty, increasing with it. And I've often argued that it's a result of our economic model, that we practice what is called an asset depletion economy, where you deplete your asset to fund your expenditure without appropriate reinjection to cover the liabilities of that depletion. So it's simple. It is just simple accounting and finance, where your total net worth equals your asset minus your liabilities. So each time you sell your crude or you mine your mineral resources, actually you're getting poorer because you're depleting your assets. The crude and the mineral resources that you mine and sell are part of your overall total wealth. So if you deplete them and you do not re-inject the appropriate amount to cover the liabilities of that depletion, you're basically getting poor. It's simple accounting and finance.
Particularly because oil output dropped, but the agri sector, we understand, improved, quite responsible for what we're seeing. But very important point you made, and we'll come to explore that further and look at the figures. But let me get your opening thoughts, Gospel, on this one. Please go ahead and preach.
Thank you very much, Kayode. I appreciate the time again. So it's really simple. From an economic standpoint, GDP and GDP growth only reflects economic activity. And you can agree with me that you can have motion in the wrong direction, or you can have motion without enough, to reflect a strategic direction. So GDP doesn't reflect economic productivity. They are two different things. So whilst the activity makes sense, and that's what we try to measure, that's what we try to discuss, that's what we try to reflect, it doesn't measure productivity. So the elements for productivity are non-GDP elements. However, GDP can be used, or policies can be used to steer GDP in the direction where it delivers productivity as well, such that public finance, public funding can go into infrastructure, into sectors, unlock the services sector as a low-hanging fruit, where it serves, it provides jobs for young people, where, the average common man can afford to eat, can afford to transport, can afford to find education and healthcare that, that elevates the quality of their lives. So when you see that productivity, it happens because policies have been engineered towards enabling more businesses and all of that. And that in turn empowers the GDP figures to go, in quote unquote higher. So you can have high GDP or low GDP and then low production or low productivity either ways. All right. So it doesn't equate that we are moving, does not equate that we're moving in the right direction. If that makes it a bit easier to take in. So in as much as GDP results are important, part of what we find today as an issue, not just in Nigeria, actually, it's a global issue. Low GDP growth is a global issue, but we've also seen that globally as well, the quality of life has dropped. And that's because nations are not focusing very clearly on the dynamics of productivity, and they're not empowering the dynamics of productivity. When that begins to happen, then we can begin to see.
Just quickly, I want us to do some basic economics this morning, because GDP, the definition of GDP, which is gross domestic product, is a monetary measure, right, of the market value of all final goods that are, produced within a certain period of time. In this case, Q2. So if you say it doesn't measure productivity and it's the value of products or goods produced, does that not imply some sort of productivity? Again, we're doing Economics 101 on the show this morning. So I'm trying to link that with what you said. That's why I'm cutting in.
Yeah, that's a productivity gap, as it were. All right. So, for instance, you can have XYZ. So that's the total value, the total monetary value of total goods and services produced in the country. So business A produces shea butter. That's the total value of that shea butter produced in that quarter plus that of business B. X the total amount across all sector is what you find as total GDP. However, the individual who is producing shea butter may have some more difficulties producing that shea butter, and which is what we say, the fuel issue, the inflation or the interest rates and all of those things. So businesses are struggling to keep up with production. So the aggregate total of that production, if you notice, in terms of monetary value has dropped over time. All right. I mean, when was the last time Nigeria was at a 3.1% GDP? And which is what Dr. Okunji Iweala was talking about yesterday, that in 2014, we're hitting as high as 6.5%, 6%, 7% GDP. All right, which means that Mr. A was able to produce more because the economic conditions probably favored her production. Right, you can only produce more as a business when the economic conditions favor you, when the interest rates are slightly lower, when the inflation rate is lower, when it's easy to access raw materials. When you don't have so much of the fuel subsidy, fuel issues locally, when insecurity was not a major problem at the time. It was a problem, but not a major problem at the front line. So businesses could still produce. But now what you find is that businesses are now producing at a more expensive rate. So as a result, they are transferring the extra amount of what it costs them to produce to the average price unit of that commodity. So the average consumer is having to pay more. So the average business is having to pay more to produce. The average consumer is having to pay more to consume. So what you find is that people are spending more monies trying to feed, and they are unable to feed properly, or they are unable to feed at the quality and nutrients or quantity they require to live better, to have better lives. I'm trying to be as basic as possible. So you can have increased production or decreased production at higher cost of production, which is where the productivity dynamics or the productivity levelers really lie. And that's the challenge right now with the Nigerian, or in most cases, the global economic situation.
So let's bring it back to you,
thinking.
All right, let's bring it back to, I'm sure you have responses to some of the things he said, as well as given the explanations both of you have given so far. Should the government be counting this as a gain?
Okay, I'd like to say this. Since 1970, there's no administration, head of state, president, or regime in this country that has ever become successful economically in government outside the price of crude oil. Now, there are two things that determines your success as the president of this country: price and quantities of crude oil. If both are against you, you're toast. That's the truth. Now, if you look at the trajectory of the economy from 2014, and you see that right from 2014. Let's go to slide 4. You see that we started recording trade deficits from slide 4 from 2014, and because of that massive trade deficits, it led us to where we are today. We've recorded over $137.33 billion in trade deficits, right? Now, that's slide 4. That's Nigeria's trade surplus and deficit 1977 to 2023. Now, if you also look at the growth of this GDP, one thing stands out. The quarter 2 year-to-year GDP increase. Yeah. Now, you see that from 2014 till date, right? We've recorded a total deficit of $137.33 billion. Why? Because of the end of the oil booms of the 2000 that ended in 2013. Now, before 2013, right, you look at from 1998 to 2013, you see the massive trade surpluses. Why? It was because of the oil boom. There is no president that performs in office in this country outside the price and quantities of crude. Today, you will see that we have price on our side, but there is no quantity on our side. We're just doing an average of about 1.2 to 1.3 million barrels of crude per day. Now, what does that tell you? When you go back to slide 1, please. If you go to slide 1, right? Why is the quarter 2 GDP greater than quarter 2 GDP of why is quarter 2 GDP of 2024 greater than quarter 2 GDP of 2023? It's simple. When you look at the oil prices of quarter 2 2023 and 2024, 2024 is more than. You look at, next slide please, you look at the domestic production. We've been able to ramp up production more than what we did in 2023, right? And then you look at crude exports in millions of barrels per day, right? You see the same thing. Crude prices, you see that it's more than what we did in 2023, right? Now, let's go to slide 2, please. Slide 2. Slide 2 shows domestic production of crude oil, right? We've also done more than what we did in 2023. And then you go to the next slide. Crude oil exports, as in millions of barrels per day.
That's slide 3.
Yeah, slide 3. We've also done more than what we did in 2023. So it's very simple. Just like he was saying, the GDP is the sum total of production in the economy. But is our production of crude oil, is it based on actually the real sector? The real sectors are actually the drivers that hold economic growth and makes it sustainable. So if you are just mining crude and you're selling, you're not really adding any productivity to the economy.
But they also talked about the fact that report talked about that the service sector played a key role in the numbers that we're seeing today.
Okay, good. Let me ask you something. If Channels, for instance, right, increases your salary, let's just say from the amount they are paying you now to 10 million naira a month, will that not increase the household expenditure? Your banking will also benefit, right? So whatever you're saying is as a result of your bringing in more money into the economy, and the service sector is also going to benefit, because as the money comes into the economy, it basically spreads. So basically what is happening is that Nigeria is making more money. Nigeria has made more money in this quarter compared to the quarter of last year, and obviously that will trickle down in the economy.
Let's bring it to you, Mr. Gospel, on this one as a follow-up to that, because sometimes it feels like for developing economies like ours, it looks like we just want to be just part of the ecosystem, the global system, to be talking GDP. Should we be focusing more on GDP or maybe human capital development, which can trickle down to people's well-being, and we can see it reflect positively or negatively?
So first of all, generally, GDP is important it's important enough to have that type of attention that it's receiving now, especially globally, because of growth and how growth is now a major issue for major economies. And one of the things, or one of the advantage Nigeria has, is that, despite all the issues we're seeing globally, we've been positively growing, although very, very slow. Many nations in the West and all that have been struggling at 2% for a long time. And, it sounds like a rebound than a recovery, but then should we really be focusing on GDP? Well, I mean, GDP is one of the major economic indicators. Even businesses use GDP to make decisions.
Gospel, my apologies, Gospel, if you may. Sorry, I wanted to say Human Development Index, not Human Capital Development. So I just needed to contextualize for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, I will agree with you that I think there is too much focus on GDP in quote, but for developing economy, it has to be a shared focus, because you also need that growth side for investors to make decisions, right? And also you need that shift of focus across the Human Development Index. And when you talk about the Human Development Index, the major two things you're talking about is education and health. And then every other thing wraps into it nicely. All right. But it's fair to say that our policies and everything we've been driving as a people, as a government over a period of time has not effectively delivered on those outcomes, which is why, again, GDP looks frustrated. The GDP does not create jobs. The GDP doesn't look inclusive enough, as it should. Regardless of what the rates are, unemployment is still going high, youth unemployment is still high, underemployment is the bigger monster in the room, right? So we need to actually agree with you, focus on our HDI, but then again, how do you deliver on your HDI outcomes if you're not, building infrastructure, if you're not creating the right reforms, if you're not nuancing your reforms enough to create the right deliveries across the board? And what I mean by that is the type of reforms a Lagos state will need is a completely different type of reform a Kano state will need, because those two different states have different economic realities and all of that. So, but then again, our reforms don't necessarily reflect. So, for instance, you had the Empower and a couple of other government social intervention programs, which are good, but to a large extent, they were not context fit in their delivery. How you deliver an Empower report in Osun State should even be different from how you deliver that same Empower report in Ekiti State. All right. So you may have two same states in the same region, but they are heavily nuanced in terms of economic realities and as such economic outcomes if you try to use one size fits all policies to fix them. So in our HDI thinking and design and outcomes, we need to really go deep into what the contextual issues are subnationally and locally, and then connect that deeply to GDP growth. And it's very simple. Once you're able to deliver HDI outcomes for people, they are much more productive. They can do more work, they can add more value to the economy, and that value over time improves the quality of your GDP. And I'm talking about the quality of a GDP, and that would mean the GDP rate or GDP growth, as well as the robustfulness of your economy. Even at 3%, 3.19%, our GDP is still not robust. Our economy is still not robust. For instance, if you look at the top 10 sectors that are driving growth, crop production is number one. All right, you do not, and that crop production, it's 90% of the agricultural sector. All right, so we're still struggling with an agricultural sector that is crop production led instead of value processing or value addition led. And that is what a value adding GDP should begin to look like, moving from a crop production based GDP to a value addition based GDP or sectoral representation. So I think we can deliver on both legs, and both legs are critical and important, to improve the quality of life and to achieve prosperity at a level for Nigerians.
By the way, we're meant to be doing double digits, right? It's been said that instead of running at the point we're meant to be running, we're still, crawling of sorts. In fact, we should be flying at this point with the challenges we're faced with. But I want to draw your attention, gentlemen, to something the IMF said yesterday. I was watching and listening to the IMF's resident representative in Nigeria, talking about Nigeria's GDP figures. So we're doing 3.19. But IMF said that, we can even do 5% this year if we're able to cut two issues. One, bottlenecks in governance and business regulations. If we're able to cut by 25%, then IMF projects that we're able to do 5% at least this year. That was a presentation yesterday from the IMF's resident representative here in Nigeria. So I don't know if it resonates with you, because if we talk about productivity, then obviously we need to do more for businesses, the SMEs that are lifeblood of our economy. If we're talking about investing in Nigeria, getting a lot more investment, then those bottlenecks with governance need to be looked at. So I don't know if that resonates with you. Do you think that is a low-hanging fruit that we can easily tweak and say, okay, let's reduce this 25% across whether federal or subnationals, and then we can get at least 5%?
Okay. I've done researches on the industrial revolutions. There are 4 key success factors, right? MSMEs are major drivers. They are the major drivers of the economy, right? Now, the success factors of industrialization, which I have seen repeat itself from one industrial revolution to the other. A key success factor there is government policies. Now, if the government policies are not aligned with the realities of things, right, there's a lot of bottlenecks that will be created. Now, in Nigeria, we have a lot of inconsistent policies, and that's a major setback for investments. a major setback for foreign direct investments. So there was a story I read one time where I think a major oil company that had to go to Angola. And when I read what the CEO of the company said, it boiled down to policies, that they were not sure that they could do business in Nigeria because they were not sure of the next policies that the governments were going to give. You know, you don't want to put money into an investment and then the next day you find out that the policies have changed. They have to be very, very consistent. You're right, we can do that 5%, but government needs to sit up in bringing in the right policies to drive growth. That's just it.
Let's take it to gospel. This particular question, let me piggyback on what Kayode has said, because I know Okonjo-Iweala at WTO she said we need to be consistent we need to be very consistent with our policy. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala said we need to be consistent with our policy. And she was explaining that, look, we need to look at the way we do our politics by essence, so that when we come together and put together a policy, an administration, another administration will not come and just change the policy and make us lose the billions we lose in terms of investment. So for you, Gospel, as an economist, if you were to advise the policymakers, who are the politicians at the end of the day, what will it be that they can do to improve investor confidence? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about productivity. Because I'm even wondering how we grew with the environment we're living in terms of high cost of doing business, in terms of high interest rates, some companies closing shops, and we're still pointing 3.19. It's impressive if we're recording the negative side and still having a high growth in GDP. I just needed your take on it.
I mean, in terms of being that impressive, that tells you the level of resilience of the Nigerian economy, in as much as so many things have failed, you know, and that's also to tell you that many things are still working. However, if we had that consistent policy beat, like Dr. Okonjo-Iweala had mentioned, a lot of things would be way better than it is right now. But if you look at it globally and even in Nigeria, it's always a tug of war between politics and policy, you know, and one will always rub off on the other. And unfortunately, politics always rubs off on politics. Even in the UK, you see how the Tories and the Labour are, you know, having, you know, at loggerheads on policies, you know, and then how politics has come to play on that outcome as well. So I think it's everywhere in the world. That inconsistency of policies is everywhere in the world. But for some nations, it's really it's a more serious thing to look at. And for Nigeria, it's quite worrisome, because even at the policy side, you can you even question the quality of thinking, the quality of design that goes into those policies, the quality of its delivery. And in many cases, we get the policies right, but in the delivery phase of those policies, it's literally very poor. And then on the layer of that, there are issues with inconsistency, and it's even incoherent, meaning one policy is not enabling the delivery of the other one, or it's enabling the delivery of the other one. So I agree, we need to constantly look at those policies in terms of, you know, and all of that. But then the political class have to be, as much as possible, you know, embrace the need for policy consistency, because you can't also take out the fact that politics is a major bit of on this whole mix. And one important thing that we need to understand about the politics and dynamics of things is that politics would deliver policies on the grounds of interest to start with. So if the people at the politics table do not align on interest, it will be a lot difficult to further a particular policy consistently over a period of time. And that's how the world is beginning to evolve, and unfortunately Nigeria as well. So how do you get politics to revolve around the place of interest that favors the people, so that policies can be furthered or delivered consistently over time in that space? That is one of the biggest challenge of the 21st century, and even a bigger challenge for developing economies like Nigeria. Also important for us to take into consideration that we have low-hanging fruits, all right? And like IMF had mentioned, that Nigeria needs to probably reach the 5%. We can do way more than the 5%. But my argument has always been, since I started practicing as an economist, I don't think it's much about the GDP growth than it is about the quality of life of the average. We can still hit 7%, and the exchange rate is really at a very, very, very poor state. We can still hit 7%, and the cost of doing business is very high. So we need to deal with the productivity levelers, or the productivity drivers, so to say, the access to market issues, the access to finance issues. The average Nigerian startup, you know, should be able to produce chocolates, and those chocolates should be able to thrive globally. I should be able to buy those chocolates in the UK. Somebody else should be able to buy those chocolates in New York, a made in Nigeria chocolate in New York. All right. Until we're able to scale our economy or our SMEs at that level, Nigeria may not be able to get past its productivity issues or its growth vis-a-vis productivity issues that we have today. Also to think about the fact that,
pardon me, the point you made is quite important. I remember we had a conversation recently with a chocolate producer who says he still has to buy cocoa in dollars here in Nigeria. So imagine he's seeing the cocoa being harvested not far from him, and he's trying to purchase it, but he has to buy it in dollars. And we've clamored, hopefully the government listens, and to try to introduce the same policy they're trying to implement in the crude oil sector, selling crude in naira, for maybe producers or people who want to buy cocoa and some of these other raw materials. So a very vital point you made. And it just takes me to the next question. And I want both of you to speak to it. Mr. Osayali, you opened up this particular conversation earlier on where you talked about how the price of crude oil and the production of crude oil is tied to whatever figure we're seeing, particularly in the economy. And said that if the figures don't look good, then the administration is toast in some sense. So I don't know if you're clamoring for, I don't want to use diversification because we've used that term for decades now. And it's been abused. But perhaps that's what you're clamoring for. Do you see low-hanging fruits that we can leverage? And I saw agricultural sector doing some numbers in this figure. Well, you've explained the services sector and where we're seeing that. So what will be your prescription? And I'm looking for prescriptions that we can begin to latch onto ASAP.
Okay. I want us to go to slide 7. Just go to slide 7. You see, I always tell people, once you read your budget, right, your yearly budget, you'll know where the country is headed. Now, I actually clipped this from the MBS, slide 7. It shows poverty profile 2010, right? That's the heading of the report, slide 7. Now, if you look at the next slide after that, right? From slide 7, let's go to slide 8. You find out that from 1980, as the population increased, right, poverty also increased. Now, you just need to go look at your budget. Let's go to slide 8, please. Slide 8. Now, you find out that as population increased, poverty increased. The GDP was increasing. But one thing is for sure, when you look at the budget, look at your education expenditure, look at your health expenditure, look at your expenditure for infrastructure. Those are the 3 things that create wealth in an economy.
Say that again. Education,
health, and infrastructure.
And the first one, the HDI.
Good, at the HDI. You understand? Go to slide 9. You find out that let's even take budget 2024 for instance, right? We had a $36 billion budget, but when you look at the funds that were allocated to these 3 things, we're only 13% of the budget. So this is the reason why you find out that no matter what you do, we can't get out of this quagmire we found ourselves, because the investment part of the budget is investment that actually create wealth and move people out of the economy. But basically what we're doing is we're just selling the crude oil and we're spending on frivolities.
What are those frivolities you've noticed, just so we break it down properly?
Okay, good. Now look at the government expenditure, for instance. Now, you cannot run a 70-75% recurrent expenditure and only a 20-25% capital expenditure and expect that an economy will grow. It's not possible.
Okay.
It's not possible.
Let's take it to Mr. Gospel. That means if you look at even the budget of the ministries, you see that personnel cost alone takes on
so
a lot.
You look at travels, you look at allowances. You know, I've always said this, right? The budget is designed to put money in the pockets of people, and it is not designed for growth and investment.
Okay, I think I've seen that level of what you mentioned in some of the budgets we looked at. Mr. Gospel, let's begin to wrap this up. So, do you think that also value addition, some level of getting to where the NNPCL is saying we want to be net exporter of petroleum products is going to lead us to a better economy? Because it looks like Africa is a hub for raw materials, not for finished products, and that has held us back.
One of the reasons why Africa is a hub for raw materials and not finished products is because of fiscal and people indiscipline, to a very large extent, or governance indiscipline, safe to say, but to a large extent, people are the ones governing. When I mean people, I'm not talking about those in government alone, pressure groups, civil society, individual citizens, and all that. But safe to say that the Nigerian economy is already diversified. Diversification is no longer the problem because you have 94% of the economy built on non-oil. You have 58% of the economy services driven. Very few countries will you find that at par level of agriculture and industry. Then you now have that 58% pillar for services. But what has happened is that there are no productivity drivers powering those sectors. The UK is services driven, Dubai is trying to be, and all of that. So, but Nigeria has those shared representation already. So, diversification is not a problem. The problem has been we've not properly unlocked the productivity drivers across those diversified streams that we have at the moment. So one of the major things we can then begin to look at is how do we embrace value additions in the context of our productivity drivers across the non-oil sector. Now, you have a lot of SMEs who are ready to export, but they are unable to export. You have a lot of people who are in the services sector, who can probably freelance or graphic design and all that, but they probably even do remote work for companies abroad. But we don't even have the data. Nigeria doesn't have a national services policy. We don't have a national services policy that is helping to unlock the value of the services sector. If you look at the gig sector, MCs, event managers and all that, there is nothing happening at that sector to create more ecosystem value. There's a lady called Nigeria Branch. She did a trade fair in the UK. That should be something that should be powered in collaboration with the Nigerian government to support more Nigerian businesses get their made in Nigeria products out there. But there was a lot of struggle. Because you can't do it alone as an individual. You can't upscale that kind of thing as an individual. So in terms of there are issues around how we are positioning, there are issues around where we are investing in. And like my colleague said on the call, the budget is an instrument that shows where the government's language and commitment is. It's a different conversation when you're talking about diversification. Economy is already diversified, but the attention, the commitment, and the resource to power the value of that diversification that already exists is tilted wrongly. I don't know if you get what I mean. So, and that's the issue that we're probably having as one of the pool of challenges. So I think we need to begin to organize ourselves in such a way that we need to prioritize. And it's actually difficult to prioritize when you have a lot of vested interest on the table. So the question is, we need to align those interests in the areas where the interest of the populace, the interest of the OPS, the business community lies, and begin to drive policies in those areas. And one of the critical elements of the Nigerian economy that can begin to drive those kind of things are pressure groups, civil society groups, organized private sector groups. But the problem as well is that they don't advocate intelligently. They don't lobby intelligently, and all of those things. So you need to be able to get government to a point where they can understand that their interest must align with the diversified streams of the economy to unlock value. And when you unlock value, it's going to be prosperity for all to a large extent. However, as well, the principle of extractive institutions and how extractive institutions work is to disempower the majority to empower the minority, which is a conversation for another day. So the prospect of Nigeria working is there.
Right.
All right. We don't need to do anything more than we need to do. We just need to align the interest on policies in areas and spaces where it delivers value for the already diversified economy.
So let the politics deliver good policies. After all, that is meant to be the essence of politics, not fighting and all of that. But gentlemen, we have to thank you so much for your interventions on this one. Clearly, there's a lot of potential, as we've said, and all of these ideas, we hope we can bring them together and ensure that we use them for the good of our nation. Gospel Obede, a research economist, thank you for your time and for preaching on the show this morning, as well as Mr. Roman Asegale, business and economic intelligence analyst, head consultant, CEO, Intel Serve Incorporated. Thank you for your interventions.
Thank you.